Hey, this is Andrew Brown, and this fall along, we're going to learn how to work with Azure's SDK. So we're going to work with a variety of different languages, and we're going to interact, I suppose, with a storage account. So what I want you to do is make your way over to your portal here and type in storage accounts across the top, and we will create ourselves a new repository here, or sorry, storage account, and we'll call this one My SDK Playground. And we will say OK, and I'll just type the same thing, my SDK Playground. You might have to put some numbers on the end there because these are fully qualified domains. East US is totally fine, standard is fine. We'll go ahead and hit review and create. So we'll give it a moment there. Then we'll go hit create. And we just have to wait about 30 seconds for this to finish. While this is going, what we can do is make our way over to GitHub because we're going to need a repository to play around in. So I'm going to create a new repository and we will choose, I don't want a template, but I want to go to my own, and this will be my SDK Azure Playground. Putting the word Azure in there so I know what this is later on. We'll say add README. We're not going to choose a git-ignore file because we'll have to vary it based on a couple different folders. And you should have Gitpod installed, or if you don't, you can use your local machine. It's up to you. But it's a lot easier if you use Gitpod here. It's free to use, so no reason not to. To use Gitpod, all you're doing is attaching this in the front of your URL. If you want the button, you can go get the Chrome extension. I'm going to go ahead and hit Gitpod and spin up that environment. Going back to our resource or storage account, you can see it's deployed, so we'll go to that resource. And what we'll need here is a single container. So that is something that we will grab here right away. And then, so let's just say container 1. I'll make it private. I'll just make it 1 with no hyphen because I think that's how I wrote the instructions. And so in here, we will need to upload some kind of file. So I'm just going to upload data pipe and data stair. Upload any files you like, but you'll have to change the names accordingly. What we'll need to do is make our way over to access controls. I'm actually going to do this at the storage level. So we'll go back up a layer here. Go back to that resource. We'll go to access keys. And we are going to need our connection string. Oh, sorry, shared access signatures. Well, we'll figure it out here in a moment because we do need to. I thought it was under access keys that it shows. Oh, it's right here, connection string. Okay, so it is right here. We'll be in good shape. So what we'll do is go back to our Gitpod, and we're going to make 3 folders. We're going to have Ruby. We're going to have Python. And we are going to have JavaScript. So we'll just say, yeah, JS for JavaScript. And in each of those, we're going to create a new file. So say gem file. This will be the, actually, I want to generate that out. So we'll cd into that directory, and I'll say bundle init. So that will create a way for us to manage packages in Ruby. For Python, we'll create a new one called requirements.txt, and then for JavaScript, this will be npm init. And so these are the 3 ways. Well, I should have done -y on this here. These will be the 3 ways that we bring in our external libraries of the Azure SDK into each of these programming environments. So first for Ruby, we'll go through that one. So for this one, we need to install a gem called Azure Storage Blob. So that will be for that one. For Python, it is called, I'm just trying to find the name here. It is Azure Storage Blob, and we can give it a version here. We could also take the version out. It probably should still work without the version there. And then for our package.json, we'll just install that there as well. So I'm just going to cd into Python because it's easier to install Python not Python packages, but JavaScript packages from the CLI here. So I'm just looking for what it's called. So it's npm install @Azure Storage Blob. All right, so this one's installed. We go into package.json. We can see it's required. The gem file, in order to install into Ruby, we have to do bundle install. And the reason I'm doing them all in parallel is I'm trying to show you there's a pattern, right? You're installing the package. You're basically doing the same thing over and over. It's just that the syntax is slightly different. For Python, it's going to be pip install -r requirements. And I generally remember all these things. You know what I mean? Like, I might not remember all the details, but I know that the patterns are the same, and that makes it a lot easier. And we call this cloud programming because you don't need to know everything in order to do this. So the first one that we're going to set up is the Ruby file. So we'll make a new file here, and we'll just say main.rb, which is an okay name here. And we'll get coding with this one first. So what we'll need to do is require, and we'll do Azure Storage Blob. And here we want the account name, and we want to have the account key. So we'll go back over to here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the first key. So we'll say show. And I don't want to put it actually in here. I want to put it down in my environment variable. So I'm going to say export account key here equals, and then I'm just going to do double quotations and paste it in and hit enter. And I'm going to do GP, that's for Gitpod environments, account key. I'm just setting it twice so that if we have to restart this environment, that these keys will persist. Okay, so what we'll do here is just put in env parentheses, and this will be account key. So that'll be the way we import it into Ruby, because that's how you do it. Well, this one's account key, this is account name. So we'll say account name, and then here will be account key. And if we were to write puts account name, puts account key, that should print those out so we can see if they work. So we'll do bundle exec Ruby main. So this is a pretty common way, and I'm doing it in the wrong folder. We got to make sure we're in the Ruby folder before we do that. So this is a common way in Ruby to run things in the context of the gem file. You'll see that's kind of a bit of a trend for all these different programming environments. So we'll go ahead and hit enter, and it should just print out the keys. It printed out the first one, but not the second one. We didn't set the account a name yet. So this is the account name for it. So we'll do export account name. The reason we're doing export is that it actually loads the environment variable. So if we go here and say grep account, you can see it's actually loaded into our developer environment, and then Gitpod environment is going to persist it if we restart this environment. So there's that one, and then we want to do it for Gitpod. There we go. So they're both set. If I just double check here and we do this, they both show up, so that is good. And so the next thing we want to do is make a client. So we want to establish a connection. So I'm going to do Blob Client equals Azure Storage Blob. Blob service dot create. If you're wondering like where do you find these things, you just like search on Google. You say Azure Blob Storage Ruby, like, and maybe documentation, and you know, through there you can kind of find information. There's probably like a documentation page. If we go here, I know there's one. Maybe here, and then you scroll down, blobs. Yeah, so there's all sorts of ways. Yeah, this is pretty similar code here. So there's all sorts of way to find it. You just have to kind of search around, and eventually you acquire that knowledge. So we need the storage account name, and then we need the storage access key. So this will be the account name, and this will be the account key. And then down below it, we'll just do Blob Client. We'll make sure that works. So we'll go back and, hit up on the bundle exec here. And so it prints out some kind of object. So we know that is now, at least the client's being created. So now let's go ahead and actually print something out. So we'll go Blob Client list containers, parentheses, each do container. And so we're just kind of doing an iteration here, and we'll just do container name. And if we hit up, it will print out container 1. So that container now does exist. Let's say we wanted to go create a container. That's something we can do as well from here. So we'll say Blob Client, create container. And I'll just say some container name here, and we'll do it again. And if we go over here and take a look at our containers, we should see a second container called some container name. So that one is working fine. Let's say we want to print out the contents. So we'll do Blob Client list containers. Well, actually, we already did this up here. I'm not going to print it out twice. We'll just do it in the interior here. Might as well just print out the contents of all the blob. So we're going to see what is actually in the containers. So say container name dot each do blob, and then we'll do puts to interpolation blob name, and we hit up. List blobs probably. That's probably what it's supposed to be here. You can see it's printing out the names here, so that's working out fine. It had a HTTP error. I don't know if that actually matters. We'll do it again. Oh, you know what? It's because we already created this one, so we'll just comment this out. That was just like a one-off there. But you can see, so it's not going to create the same folder, that it's printing the contents of container 1. There's nothing in container 2 or some container. So that is pretty straightforward there. Let's go take a look at Python. So we'll make a new file here. We'll call it main.py. Normally, like if you want to isolate your libraries, you create a Python environment. I didn't do that. I don't really always remember how to do it because I don't work in Python that often, but I know it exists. But that's the idea behind us doing the bundle exec, or if we do npm start, which you'll see here, is that it's in the context of our isolated libraries that we want to use. But anyway, we'll get started with Python here. So very similar process. We're going to do Azure storage blob base blob service, import base blob service. A little bit more verbose. I'm not a big fan of Python. I need to figure out how to get environment variables. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so to get environment variables is just import OS, and then from here we can get OS environ squares, or we can just do get, I suppose. Get, it's probably nicer, and we can do account name here. See the process a little bit different. Account key. Instead of puts, it will be print. So account name, account key. Starting to look familiar, right? Just slightly different. And we'll have to be in the right folder here, so we'll make our way over to Python. This one's going to be Python main. We don't have to, do it in the context stuff because it's already there. No module name Azure storage blob service line. I don't know if we did it install. I thought we did, so we'll do it again. Requirements.txt. I mean, it's totally possible I typed something wrong. I'm just double checking. Azure storage blob base blob service. Looks correct to me. We'll try this again. I'm just going to do a quick search here just to see if I typed it wrong. Just in case it's a versioning issue, because we did have a version in there of 2.1.0. I just don't want this to mess up, so I'm going to go here and go to 2.1.0, and we'll try this again, because you never know if these requirements ever change. I think it wants double equals. Yeah, it does. And we'll give this another go. Okay, so now it's working. So the versioning does matter. We're not on the latest version, but honestly, it doesn't really matter because, it doesn't. So now that we have those two printing out, we can go ahead and make our client, or I guess service in this case. The wording's a little bit different each one. I don't know why, but it's just how they do it. So here we will have account name equals account name, account key equals account key, and we will print out the blob service as similar to before. We will go up. Oh, sorry, I wanted to do Python main here. And so that prints out no problem. Now we'll need to iterate through this stuff. So we'll say containers equals blob service list containers, parentheses, for container in containers. And this is indent based, so there's no like closing statement. We just type it like this. Container.name. I wasn't trying to run it. I think it just ran there below by accident. Just type exit down below here. We will hit, go back to, thinks I'm in a shell. I'm not in a shell. Okay, so we'll say Python main.rb again. Oh, I'm back in the main folder. So we'll say python main.rb. And it says can't open file or directory Python. If I do, oh, it's right there. Sorry. Pi. And now it's saying these don't exist. So let me just do, I think because we entered an environment, I don't know what happened here, but something happened where, see, it ran this, and it put us into the Python environment shell, and that wasn't something I intended to do. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to update our gitpod YAML file here. I'm just going to add or git ignore. I'm just going to commit this stuff to reset the environment because I really don't want to be in a Pi environment like that. It was just kind of a mistake. And git add.git ignore. Come on, let me add this darn file. I'm just trying to commit this single file here. Git add.git ignore. So that when we go over here, it's a bit more manageable. So I'm just going to commit all the code here. Ruby and some Python. And what I'll do is I'll just close this environment and then reopen it. And those environment variables should still be set because we did the gitpod enamel or gitpod environment. So we'll just give it a moment here to respin up the environment. All right, so our environment is back up. So what I'm going to do is make our way back into the Python directory, and we'll do a pip install our requirements. And so hopefully this time we don't get that weird problem we had before here. I really don't have to restart. Notice it's printing the container name, so pretty similar to what we did before. And so what we'll need to do now is just print out the actual objects like we did with the Ruby script. So we'll go back here to the main, scroll on down, and we'll do blobs equals blob service list blobs parentheses container name for blob in blobs. We'll say print F. I think it's just single quotations. I always want to do doubles there, but it's just single. And we'll do curlies like that. Blob name. So you saw this in the Ruby one, but it was like, instead it was a pound and double quotations. So this is called interpolations, where you inject a variable into a string. Each language does it a little bit different. So let's take a look here at this one. Prints out the object, same thing. So very similar. Let's go take a look at JavaScript. So that is our next one here. So we'll go over here, we'll make a new file, we'll call it main.js. We will need to update our package.json, so we have a way of calling the script. So we'll just call it start here, and we'll just say node main.js. And then we will go up here, and we will load the stuff in. So we'll say constant curly's blob service client, storage shared key credentials, credential. You got to spell it right or it will mess up for sure. Equals require @ double single quotations Azure storage blob. And we'll do constant account name, constant account key. And there will be this one, and then there will be this one. So how do we load environment variables in JavaScript? I'll be back in 2 seconds. Actually, I'm surprised I don't remember because I did it in so many other follow-alongs. It's actually just process. It's a problem when you move from a lot of languages. You have to kind of look things up multiple times, but it's okay because as long as you know what you need to look up. env.account key. So those are our two that we're going to load here. We need to create a credential key. So we'll say key credential equals new storage shared access credential, parentheses, account name, account key, and then down below we'll create a blob client equals new blob service client. It's interesting like how they're all slightly named different. So like in Python, it's just service, Ruby, it's just client, and then in In JavaScript, it is service client. So we'll do a URL. So this is when I always say like things are a fully qualified domain name. That's what I mean is like you can literally call services like storage based on a fully qualified domain. So we'll do blob core windows.net and we'll go down below here and say key credential here. And so we'll do console log blob client. I don't know if we'll get anything intelligible out of this, but we'll give it a go. I think like as long as we don't get an error, it should be fine. Because I don't know if it would return anything in JavaScript. But we'll find out here in a second. So we'll make our way over to Node.js or JavaScript. We'll do an npm install. npm install. And we must have a syntax error here. There's a comma missing here. Whoops, I didn't want it on both lines. It's just being silly. We'll go back here, do npm install. So we have to do it because I restarted the environment because those did not persist. And what we'll do is do npm start. Oh, we are getting data. So there are no errors, which is good. And we're getting a object back. So this looks good. These errors are old errors. We'll go back to our main.js and we will do what we've been doing, which is iterating through stuff. So the first thing we'll need to do is create a new function. We're going to call this async function container inventory. I really don't like having to do asynchronous stuff when I don't have to, but that's like a common feature. I mean, other languages have it, but that's something you do often in Node.js or JavaScript. So we'll say for await parentheses constant container in containers curlies console log container name container dot name, and then we will call this function. So hopefully this works. npm start. We don't need this anymore here. It's just gonna get in our way, so I'm gonna take it out. It doesn't like the in. It's supposed to be of. If it's not in, change it to of. We'll iterate through here, and we get our two containers. Now we need to go get the blobs within it. So in here, what we'll do, I just have to think about this for a second. We need to do constant container client equals blob client get container client parentheses container name, and we'll say let blobs equals container client list blob flat parentheses container name. We'll say for await const blob of blobs console log parentheses backticks. Is it backticks? Yeah, it's backticks. Dollar sign curlies. Again, this is how, each one has different interpolation, right? So like Python, it was single string. You had to put this F in the front to do interpolation. Ruby was just double quotations with a pound curly. So they're all just slightly different, and hopefully this works. Nope, container is not defined. So what line is it complaining on? It's complaining on the list blob flat right here. So I must have spelt it wrong. We'll go ahead and paste that in there. It didn't paste right. We'll just retype it. Container. Try it again. There we go. And so that's all three of them. So that's all I really wanted you to do. Just go through the motions of using the SDK with some language, and just to see that there are some patterns to languages, so it's not as super hard as you imagine. We'll close that. It doesn't really matter if we leave it around or we don't delete it. But for the resource group here with the storage account, we will go ahead and delete. I'll go in here. We'll go into my SDK play, and we'll click into the resource group here. Lots of ways to get to the resource group. We'll go ahead and delete our resource group. And I'll also delete the storage account. So there you go.